So today I'm going to do a study on wealth. So if you turn to 1 Corinthians 10, verse 24. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. So we can break that down. Somebody can get a job and they put forth effort to that job, knowing that the gain is going to be, somebody else, usually the owner, is going to get a larger gain out of it than they would. But when you work for somebody, you put on their uniform and you're working for them. So I wanted to start there, and that's pretty much how you would read that verse if you only read that verse. And there's actually a lot more to that. So we're gonna keep going and get a little deeper understanding of what that really means. So we'll see in the next verse is that Paul starts talking about food again. And because everybody eats, I think that's why Paul chose to talk about food so much, because the difference in the tradition of the Jews versus the Gentiles in food, it was a point that was easy for him to talk about so that he could show a cohesiveness between the two groups, even though their food traditions were so different at that point. So let's read on. And I'm going to read up to verse 33. Whatsoever is sold in the shambles, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. If any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and ye be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you eat, asking no question for conscience sake. But if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other. For why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? For if I by grace be a partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that which I give thanks? Whether therefore ye eat, or drink, or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. Give none offense neither to the Jews, nor the Gentiles, nor to the church of God, even as I please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. So going back to verse 25, whatever is sold in the shambles is like the marketplace, that eat. So you can eat what's sold in the market, asking no question for conscience sake. So that's kind of an easy one. And then the next verse says why you can eat what's sold in the markets. For the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. And then the verse 27 is a when. When can you eat? Other than by yourself, you can also eat if with them that believe not, if they bid you to a feast and you decide to go. And it restates there, whatever is set before you, eat, asking no question for conscience sake. So that's all pretty straightforward. Since the last video we had talked about food pretty in depth. So that's all pretty straightforward. Now we get to verse 28. But if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So verse 28 is now saying when not to eat something, and it's saying is when any man tells you that it has been offered to idols. And it's because he had shown that it was offered to idols. And we get another why you shouldn't eat it, and it's because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So if you're told that the meat has been offered to an idol, you shouldn't eat it because the meat should have been offered to the Lord. And it wasn't. And then it was pointed out that it wasn't by somebody. So now we go to verse 29. Conscience, I say, not thy own, but of the other. For why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? So verse 29 gets even more in depth. And the previous verses says not to eat it, but then verse 29 says not because of your own conscience, but because of the man that pointed it out to not eat it. And then why, another reason for why not to eat it is because the other man had made it an offense to eat it. So if you do eat it through liberty, he can judge you as evil. And that's what verse 30 says. For if by grace be a partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that which I give thanks? And verse 31 is reinforcing that we eat and drink and whatever we do to the glory of God. And the food topic in verse 32, it says, give none offense neither to the Jews nor the Gentiles nor to the church of God. So again, Paul's trying to bring these groups together. So going even more in depth into verse 29, conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other, for why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? So basically what Paul's trying to point out here is that this is a weak brother who has pointed out that the meat was offered to an idol. We see here that everything is of the Lord's, so the weaker brother didn't need to point out that the meat was offered to an idol, but because he did, and then if he doesn't eat it and then you eat it, he can judge you now for eating it and think of you as evil, according to what's wrote here. Or if you eat it and then he eats it, still unaware of the part where verse 26, for the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof, then you're not really helping them understand why eating that thing would have been okay if they wouldn't have brought it to man's conscience, saying that it had been offered to idols. So this passage here is sort of it's like a trap. And the trap is that if you eat it, then he can judge you as evil. And if you be of the Lord and you're being judged as evil, that's not something that you would want to be judged as even for a moment of your day. So that's one way that it's a trap to you, but it's also a trap to themselves, even though they've put themselves in that situation by their own conscience. And if you eat it, then you offend the conscience of that weaker person. So what Paul's writing here is that we shouldn't give a non-believer an opportunity to judge us or our Christian liberty, even if that means not partaking in something that you know you could eat. So, now if we go to verse 33, and this is the why, another why. Even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they might be saved. So if you partake in this unbeliever brethren of yours that you've gone to feast with, points out that it's been offered to idols and doesn't eat it, then you're not being, you're seeking your own profit at that point, as opposed to all men's profits, which we had discussed why just above. Because they're weaker in the mind with not knowing that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. They don't understand that yet. So by you partaking, it's an offense to your brother. So now that we've gone through the the 9 verses after the first one, let's go back to the first one again. 1 Corinthians 10:24, let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. So if you got that in your daily Bible notifications, you would probably honestly believe that verse is talking about money, and kind of how he had explained it with the job and knowing that the gain's going to be somebody else's, but you're still going to work for them. And so if you read that verse and didn't continue reading, you would think of that as a physical form of being charitable. So now that we've read the next 9 verses, and I'll even read the last one again. Even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. We can see now that yes, there is a physical form of charity in the world, and that's what most churches teach with tithing and giving of charities and money, right? So, but as we read through the rest of the verses, we get to a point of understanding where there is a spiritual form of charity. So, now that we've gone over all of that, let's talk about charity a little bit. So, if we turn to 1 Corinthians 13, and I wrote a small little summary here. So here it is. So charity and love kind of go hand in hand, okay? So I wrote here, using what you have to benefit your neighbor for the glory of God and to profit not yourself but the church. So having had that little summary, I'm going to read chapter 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, I have not charity. I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, and have not charity, I am nothing. For though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemingly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, bearing all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but the face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three, but the greatest of these is charity. So based on what we had talked about before in 1 Corinthians 10, the spiritual charity versus the physical world charity are two different things. And the worldly charity is what is taught in churches and you know, when I say that, I'm sure there are some churches here and there that would teach charity in this manner. So to kind of reflect on what we had talked about, is that because the brother was weaker in the conscience and didn't understand that the earth is of the Lord's and the fullness thereof, you have that decision now to essentially deny yourself of your liberty to eat that thing for the sake of their conscience. And that is what chapter 13 is discussing, that you get to a point where you want to benefit your neighbor for the glory of God and to profit the church. So let's now go to 1 Corinthians 8. And here again, Paul starts a discussion about food again. To them, you know, everyone eats, so because there was even a difference in food and what people would eat, it was kind of a hot topic, you know. So this is discussing things offered to idols, and we're going to read it. It's pretty short. Now, as touching things offered unto idols, we know that we all have knowledge puffed up, but charity edifieth. So we had read in chapter 10 that you could eat the thing, okay? But, and so here, you know you could eat it, right? But charity edifieth. And if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know. But if any man love God, the same is known of him. As concerning therefore the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other than God but one. And just to go back to 1 Corinthians 26, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. That's where I'm getting that from, where knowledge says you can eat it, but with charity concerning who you are fellowshipping with, even though you have knowledge, charity edifieth in this particular case, which is obviously mentioned multiple times throughout the Bible. So, let's keep going. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father, of whom all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge. For some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So we had talked about that already, that somebody may say, oh, that's offered to idols, and the place that we had talked about it, it seemed as if they weren't going to eat it. So here it's saying that somebody knows that it's been offered to idols and then eats it anyways. And the whole point about chapter 10 is that you don't ask the question, you don't know that it's been offered to an idol, but if somebody tells you it is, then you now know. So like I said, this is kind of a heavy topic here, so let's keep going. But meat commendeth us not to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, neither if we eat not are we the worst. But take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to them that are weak. For if any man see thee which hast knowledge sit at meat in the idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? So again, because they don't understand the part of 1 Corinthians 10:26, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, they don't understand that yet. That is what is saying here, that the conscience of him which is weak will be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols, as opposed to eat those things which are, of the Lord's, because of the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So, and through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died. But when ye sin so against the brethren, and wound their weak conscience, ye sin against Christ. Wherefore, if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. So the whole point is to essentially deny yourself of the liberty that you know that you have to eat that thing, and it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the brother or the whoever you're fellowshipping with, that they because they're weak, not and don't understand the fullness of the world, that it's or the fullness of the earth, that it's the Lord's. It's kind of like you don't want to give them a get out of jail card when they don't understand, when the differences between offered to idols and of the Lord's. So everything is of the Lord's, but if a person in their mind and their conscience believes that a thing is offered to an idol, then as Christians in fellowship, we shouldn't partake to not offend that person's mind, your conscience. And the Bible here calls that charity. So, let's now look at Galatians 2:20. This is a good Galatians 2:11 to actually just Galatians 2. If you want to read this on your own as like homework, that'll be a good thing for you to do, because I'm just gonna read one verse here, but to give you a quick summary, Paul is accepted as an apostle, and then he meets up with Peter, and they all go eat. Okay, we're talking about food. It's a hot topic, like I like to say. So, and then what happens is Peter, he plays a Jew, and there are Gentiles around them, and Paul ends up calling him out on it, because it ends up offending the Gentiles. So that's a little summary of that whole chapter, but I'm going to read verse 2:20. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. So Jesus gave himself for us. And based on what we've been talking about, is it not simple to not partake in something when it will offend your brother's conscience? Is that not easier than Jesus dying for you? So, I just wanted to read that. Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And now, let's go to John 15, verse 12. This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends, if ye do whatsoever I command you. So after everything that we had talked about, what I've come to understand is that this commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you, is the commandment of charity. And if we go back to 1 Corinthians 13, and now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three, but the greatest of these is charity. So, I wanted to just do a quick summary of all of that, and again, we started out with wealth, and when we think of wealth, we think of money, And then if we read, let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth, if you only read that one verse, you would think that we'd be thinking about money, but really that is the physical form of charity if you only read that verse. And then as you continue down in that chapter, you see that there's a spiritual form of charity, and that is between our brothers and sisters, our friends, and the word friend in Strong's means neighbor. I hope y'all are having a great week, and God bless you all, in the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.